our panel discussion now. So Richard Bird from Ping Identity is part of our panel today. Also, Louis Lorraine, who we spoke to earlier on, who's still Chief Compliance Officer for Banco Bradesco. Obviously, Rajan is presenting with us just before we took our break. Prashant Sharma is with us as well, who's Head of Product Digital Identity at MasterCard. And your moderator today is digital identity expert Mel Reyes, who's currently VP of Compliance and Synchrony. So Mel, you're in charge here with this lot. So I'm going to leave things over to you with us for our panel discussion as we're talking about the pandemic that is acting as proof that digital identity is essential. So Mel, first off, welcome to the discussion. Thanks for being with us. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Great, good to have you here. And yeah, you've got quite a wealth of experience to put some questions to here. So I'll hand over to you.
All right, thank you, Richard. It's an honor to join this esteemed panel today to discuss reimagining digital identity. Good day to everyone, wherever you are across the globe. I am Mel Reyes. Much like the panelists here, I have decades of experience in building the teams that either make or save companies money. You know, I've done that through financial services, CPG, and a bunch of other companies. And what I've found is the most common thread across these is security, and most importantly, identity and fraud management. You know, I'd like to welcome Richard, Prashant, Rajan, and Luis to the panel. This panel basically covers customer, product, transformation, and wait a minute, who invited compliance? Right? But seriously, you know, compliance does offer the guardrails that, you know, keep us a little bit sane here. So thank you to all of you for joining. And I think, you know, really kind of covers what we want to talk about here, those 4 key areas about digital identity. So more than ever, and you've probably seen this in the last 6-7 months, digital identity has become topmost on top of the security and other components, whether it's fintech, whether it's retail or otherwise. So it's kind of proven to be essential. And what I'm hoping that we can get from our panelists is some great insights into how we, you know, are addressing that, and how do we take some actionable plans moving forward. Great discussions on how to, you know, cost justify the guardrails that we need to set up. So I'm going to just go ahead and dive in and try to see if we can leave it open to whoever wants to answer the question, or I may just voluntold a few folks with some of these questions. But I think the first piece, you know, as we're looking at where we are in the current state of the pandemic, the transitions, working from home, everything else, is, you know, how do we navigate this new norm with digital identity, right? How, you know, you've got different scales and scope of companies. So I maybe want to introduce Prashant, and maybe you can kind of give us some insights into that from a product standpoint.
Sure. First of all, Mel, thank you so much. And great to meet you, and great to meet everybody as well. So as Mel told, you know, I'm Prashant Sharma. I lead our digital identity product at MasterCard. And digital identity, you know, if anybody who thinks of MasterCard, they would generally not think of MasterCard playing a role in the digital identity space. You know, traditionally, people think of us as a payment company. They see our logos on credit cards. But if you think about every interaction that user does using a card or a bank account, trust is a very, very important factor. So if we can tie digital identity behind any of the payment transaction, it makes a huge, huge impact and makes the whole payment ecosystem much more secure. And then even if we look at you know, the overall ecosystem, there are more than 1 billion people in the world who do not have a digital identity, and they're not part of formal economy as well. So this is another reason. First of all, it's a good thing to do, how we can bring people into this ecosystem. And at the same time, it's good for all of us as well. And it's not just about finance, having a digital presence. It also helps them getting access to healthcare or education or everything else as well. So when we think about digital identity and how we think about it will be the key to navigating the new normal. I'm sure we all have been impacted because of COVID. We are all sitting at home right now. This has become our gyms, our offices, our schools, all of our kids are staying at home. all the interaction that we generally used to do in a face-to-face environment, it has all become remote. So we need to make sure that every interaction that is happening, it is secure. So establishing trust, I would say, is the most critical part of this. And if we can establish trust and the entities in the ecosystem can utilize that trust to let us interact with those services, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, whether it's financial transactions, this is going to help all of us, and it's going to help everybody who's a part of this ecosystem as well.
Yeah, excellent point. And I think part of what we're seeing is many of us, right, who are in this panel or on this call have been fighting the fight for a decade on how do we improve, how do we cost justify, how do we get top down approaches to identity management and digital. And fortunately and unfortunately, being in the current situation we're in now, that's accelerated everything, right, for every company, regardless of what stage you're in. So, larger companies and are doing a lot of work, not only in their current programs like MasterCard or others, but in acquisitions, right, to pull in some of better quality or better enhanced capabilities, right. So kudos to on the product side for that. I think part of that is the conversation that I want to have with the customer experience, but I think at a global level, right. So Luis, I kind of want to target this next one to you. To kind of say, mucho gusto en conocerlo, but also, from a customer experience standpoint, right? We've got a lot of different things that are happening, especially, when we're trying to avoid the traumatic experiences that folks have, with regards to their financial institutions. So, Luis, what do you see that can enhance that user experience and kind of build a better relationship?
Hi, likewise, nice to meet you. Well, like I said during my presentation, I think the data that you select to be part of your, I would say, the Bible of that particular customer is a key. If you have a good data and you use that data on ongoing monitoring the customer and the activity of the customer, and whenever you have the contact with the customer, you have all the information handy. And if the customer have any problem to connect with the bank, you help them to connect to the bank. You made the customer feel good, feel wanted by that financial institution. Although you are still doing compliance on the background, you're still monitoring the activity in the background, but you have two phases. One is the customer face that you show to the customer how necessary he is to the financial institution. On the other hand, you are doing your work using that particular data in order to mitigate the risk.
Right.
I always say, I always say that
yeah.
A good compliance program could be a competitive advantage, because you don't going to stop payment, you don't going to stop anything for that customer, because you know your customer, you feel comfortable. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and you're right. And pre-COVID, that was a almost nice to have, right? Every company was saying, we want to treat our customers well, but we also have to risk mitigate. Post-COVID, it's regulatory. You might be mandated to treat them better and to give a lot of other leniency, but it really is from a humanity and empathy standpoint, what you really need to do. Number one, to continue to build that brand, but also to help really help that morality component that Rajan was talking about with how do you balance profit with the current state of the economy. So from a traumatic standpoint, you're right. It is about leveraging the data safely with compliance with the guardrails, and also kind of learning from it, right? So every company for the last decade or so has been diving into big data, but now is the time to take advantage of that for those traumatic experiences that people are experiencing, right? And if we look at it, from a top-down balance sheet, you've got millions of customers, you've got millions of dollars, but at the end of the day, you've got a customer, a family, et cetera, that really needs to have that level of touch using that data, like you mentioned, right? That you can assess, the risk and also provide help. So thank you. That's great. And I think that starts to so you've got the new norm, you've got the customer, and I think part of the conversation is we can think nationally, right? We can think within our realms, right? And I think you brought this up as well as Raj, and but I think what we need to also start to look at is the disparaging systems that are out there, right? To be able to do this type of identity management, but globally. Right. So not just within your company, not just within, other, groups within the company. And, I think I want to target this next one to Rajan, because I think it's really important to kind of get a good insight into, in our new virtual world, right, in our digital world that we've kind of merged into, working from home and things like that. There's a lot of remote digital identity trust that we need to build. Right. And Prashant, you mentioned banks, mobility, healthcare services, there's government and otherwise, what are the conversations that you're hearing, Rajan, with regards to, for example, federated identity or identity federation or anything along the lines of how do you get the major institutions and groups to start to work together on creating standards? What are some of those pieces that you're seeing now, and how are we navigating closer or faster to that? So Rajan.
Okay, I was on mute.
There you go.
Thanks. Okay, so the thing is, at the moment, I can of course say like I'm working with two entirely different organizations. Okay, one is of course the financial institution. I'm providing advisory to them. On the other side, Roche, the pharmaceutical company. Okay, it is more, and subject area is also entirely different. There it is a small means banking. It is more anti-financial crime. There it is smart buildings. Okay, that is what they are calling it. Where the thing is like, okay, if someone comes, some employee comes, some virtual identity through Wi-Fi. So of course, let us not go much into the detail, but we want to have some set of identities where the movement could be, their movement could also be controlled. I am not saying from the other perspective, it is from like one part of the building is more crowded. Okay, so now people should not go to that part of the building. People should be going to the other part of the building. At the same time, some of the automated, like a guest comes, the social distancing and all those stuff, all those things are going on. Now the thing is, in both the scenarios, okay, digital identity, it is going to play very important role. Okay, and that is where, the federated one, of course, is now getting more recognition and more acceptance as compared to the traditional ones. So from that perspective, the answer is, of course, federated one is now getting more attention, more acceptance due to the ease of its adoption, one can say, more trust people means the thing is, but still that subject area is, I will say, is evolving. Moreover, when I think, because for my from my core subject area perspective, which is anti-financial crime, okay, there again, the internal fraudism, okay, that is one of the concepts we always need to consider. So a lot of things are there which are being considered and being, some research is going on, some discussions are going on. So that is still one of the area where a lot of further work is required, and it is going. That's right.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We've got again 5 to 10 years worth of, identity access management, core sets and different vendors that, offer, whether it's part of a bundled, component of products, and I won't throw out any names, or if it's their main, objective to create single sign-on within, an organization. But when you start to look at that as kind of the next level up, right? You have federated now, right? So you have company to company, trusted, federated, blah blah blah. But I think what becomes really interesting is when you think about that from a fingerprinting standpoint, globally, right? So it's not just we've got our, we're federating with our client. It's the customer federating with all of what they work with, right? So I go to the doctor, I go to work, I go to school, right? So as opposed to, the B2B, that kind of connection. So I think that's, one of those pieces that we're going to see in the next, I would say, year or two, really get a lot more attention, and hopefully, from a global standpoint, start to see the security, the compliance, guards to help with fraud, but also to help with making it easier for, again, the traumatic trajectory of what we're seeing across, the world with regards to the pullback and, kind of shifts in all the industries. So that's great.
And not only that, Richard pointed out, from monitoring perspective, Richard pointed out, someone is doing what he or she is intended to do. That particular factor is very important, from learning perspective and improvements perspectives. And also, stopping if something untoward is going on, stopping then and there. Right. And now we do have the, technologies to act just in real time.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into what I was thinking about, because as we start getting bigger and we start doing all of this trust and we start doing, kind of working on this, I want to target my next one. Thank you for sliding that one right in to Richard, with regards to the hurdles, right? How, what do business needing to do to overcome this massive shift? Now, obviously, there's a scale issue, but there's also a maturity issue with a lot of companies, right? Some companies aren't as mature along their technical path. Some are, but now need to shift funding and resource. So, Richard, what are some of the biggest hurdles that you're seeing for businesses to overcome? There, Richard, did we lose you? Are you muted?
Oh, yeah, I'm there. Yeah, there we go. Did I get it? Yeah. We've only been doing this for 7 months, and we still forget to come off of mute. My apologies.
It's all good.
Yeah, I think that one of the challenges that I see, and I probably interact with 50 or 60 large enterprise customers a month, is we don't have a challenge in overcoming obstacles and hurdles. We have a fundamental philosophical centering that we need to take into account, right? When we think about the customer access in particular, customer, citizen, partner, all these different aspects, we have built security architectures and we have built philosophies and mindsets that are oriented around this notion of I control your identity, right? So we really have given none of the empowerment or the authority for an individual human being to authenticate themselves, to have the ability to do the same thing that they do on the analog. I do a lot of work with an organization called the Identity Theft Resource Center here in the United States. Last year, they had 65,000 calls for people that were victims that were looking for help from an identity theft standpoint. That data was not given away by those customers. That data was given away by companies that had been the framing body to determine what that customer's identity was. Unfortunately, through exploits and breaches, they gave that information up. And here's the real big philosophical shift that we need to make, because it changes our level of urgency in solving these problems. And it changes our prioritization on where we put the dollars, and it changes the true tangible risk reductions that we need when we look at that situation and we go, I have an obligation to protect that customer.
I'm getting a net benefit from the dollars they contribute to my bottom line. I'm getting a net benefit from the data that I then repurpose and maybe even use for other commercial purposes. And yet when things go wrong and that data for that customer or that consumer has been stolen time and time again, and they're a victim of identity theft or synthetic fraud, we as companies look at that particular individual victim and go fix it yourself. It's not our problem, right? We have to take the high ground and realize that empowering our customers in a identity authorization authentication construct that allows us to give them the ability to authenticate, to engage in self-service, to cascade information based upon consents and entitlements will not just create a better outcome for those individual human beings, that's who we're protecting, but it'll create incredible opportunities for us on the commercial side.
Right, right. And you mentioned this in your presentation, and I was like a kid in a candy shop when you were talking, because it's where my current realm is. We always talk about kind of the trajectory of identity management, right? It was and for many it still is what right, and then we've kind of transitioned into what you own, right, a phone or some other, and now it's we've moved into more of the biometrics and kind of trying to escalate even further into deeper understanding, pattern behavioral analysis, things along that line. I think one of those key things that you mentioned was authentication versus authorization, right? And a lot of folks probably on this panel know the difference, right? But it really comes down to, for me, just being able to understand and sell that, right? So from a hurdle standpoint is, clearly get the mandates down, right? That all the teams need to kind of centralize on understanding that authentication, because they may have already had authorization, right? But now we need to kind of pull the two together to get better centralized efforts on both ends. And then to really kind of shift that at what we're looking at now is Godspeed, right? And if you're not already in a program to do that, you need to do that. I want to take a little bit of a shift, because I think part of it is also, when we talk about the companies, and I know I'm flipping between the two sides because I want to kind of keep this a little bit interesting and not just very linear, right? We've talked about the global scale. We've talked about kind of the new norm, but I also kind of want to pull it back a little bit into the increase in user base, right? So yes, we've got a generational component to the acceptance and the trajectory. And I want to target this next one to Prashant, because I think what I want to kind of see is where we are with a few things, right? So, for example, the last few generations, the millennials and the Gen Zs, and the trajectory that we're seeing in digital adoption and embracing technology, is the slope is increasing, right? But there's still and I've seen this in a few articles and a few metrics. There's still that the adoption because of the baby boomers kind of influencing them on going with more legacy approaches to financial services, retail services, et cetera. But as we're looking at Generation Alpha, as we're looking at where we are digitally right now, what do you see as it's going to shape that digital experience, in security and identity management globally moving forward for Gen Alpha?
Definitely. No, thanks, Mal. That's a great question. And I think I talked about trust in one of my previous questions. So we definitely need to make sure that there is an internet of trusted data that is established as a part of that. I think establishing trust is very, very important for individuals to be able to interact more digitally with any of the services. On top of that, we need to make sure that we are respecting people's privacy. There has been many challenges where we have no idea where the data is. Many times I log into some website and then I'll get prompted that, your password might have been hacked. So, and then you go and change it. 2 months later, there is something similar as well. So you have no idea where the data is, who's sharing the data with what. So we need to make sure that any system that we are creating It is very privacy centric. There's no data that is shared without user consent as well. So, and then on top of that, I think you were asking this question previously about user experience. I think this next generation, they care a lot about user experience as well. So while we continue to focus on making sure that these systems are privacy centric, consent management is very critical, we also need to make sure that it does provide very good user experience too. We've seen examples with all these newer banks or challenger banks. I can just provide 2 fields of information and I can open up a bank account. Versus 6 years down the line, it will take me 15 minutes to fill up these forms, entering all these details, and I'm still not even getting a card at that point or a bank account at that point. So user experience is very critical as well. So I think it's going to be a combination of some of these principles: security, consent, trust, user experience. That is going to take digital identity from where it is and make it much more usable for the next generation.
Right. Yeah. I'm waiting for the day where I'm at the casino and it uses my biometrics to just say, yeah, he's not overheated. We can extend his credit line so he can keep betting. But you're right. It is a transitional piece, and that slope has gotten escalated for that Gen Alpha, which is interesting. We've kind of started over, right? Gen Z, now it's Gen Alpha, and that generation is the one that's experiencing this complete digital boom. So they're going to benefit from a lot of these identity components. And I think as we're looking at this, right, we've got, and again, I don't want to keep harping on, the last 6 to 7 months, but there has been a tremendous investment. There have been, different hurdles that everybody's come through and forced that user experience conversation on everyone, right? So where you may have, again, tried to trickle in a few user experience pieces, smarter companies kind of dove into that in the last, 5 to 10 years. You're now forced into that. I actually want to go back to Richard and kind of just say, is it too late to start that digital transformation for folks, this far into the global pandemic?
No, not at all. I think that, again, recognizing the reality of the current state, I had said it in my presentation. It is almost as if we keep building a boat and heading out to sea, and randomly, we could never predict when, the boat gets flooded, sinks, we drag it back to shore, and we don't build a new boat. We just simply put patches on it and go back out again. And that notion that we are continuing to use the same security architectures, but we're seeing escalating losses, we're seeing escalating consequences for data breaches, we're seeing escalating demands relative to compliance and regulation fines and fees, and we don't take a step back and go, what could we do different? I mean, we really do. We really have fallen into, Descartes' problem of we keep doing the same things over and over again and expect different results, right? And so, I think that there's no better, I think fundamentally, anytime we're talking about security, having been a CISO, I think fundamentally there's no better time than now to move forward in reducing risk. And many of the different methods, techniques, and topics that we've talked about today will take different thinking relative to security architectures, will take different thinking relative to reference architectures, data domicility, all these different components. But I don't know how to put it any other way. We're compelled to now, right? Because the results are clearly showing the wrong outcomes for not just our customers and citizens, but for our companies. So I think that, really taking that time and it does start at the C level. I'm extremely conscious of this. It's, a lot of my interactions are at the C and board levels. Taking that time to do a true self-assessment, throw out the audit results, throw out the compliance assessments, throw all of that out and say, in my industry, because you don't want to convince yourself and trick yourself into thinking that because I've won the game of roulette and I haven't suffered a major breach now, I'm okay, right? Look at the trends, look at the numbers, look at the analysis, have that really strong self-assessment as an organization and say, is there something that I could or should be doing different Obviously, from a parochial standpoint, those of us that have been doing this for decades say, try identity, right? Give identity a shot. Make it more than access administration and management, and put it as a core tenet of your overall security architecture, and try that. The worst that can happen is that it'll only stay the same, because it's certainly not going to get worse, right? You're going to have a much better outcome for all of those individual human beings that are associated with a better identity experience. So no better time than now.
You hope it doesn't get worse. You're right, but if you do it right.
Agreed.
Right. Okay. I know we're kind of looking at this, and we need to time box this conversation in a little bit, but there are a lot of things that are moving forward, right? I want to just remind anyone who has any questions for the panelists, please definitely chime in. But there's a lot that's going on, and I think one of the things that comes up is, and I think you alluded to this, Richard, but I want to hit up Luis on this one. From a compliance standpoint and from a scale and implementation standpoint, right? What have you seen as some of the daunting tasks to, for example, taking the approach that Richard said, put aside your current compliance, put aside everything else. How do we build a better program? Luis, what have you seen as some of those tasks? And maybe we'll come back to you, Richard, but for companies to get through their securing remote workers and remote customers. Luis? Raja, do you want to jump in? Maybe you could speak to that. Oh, no, there you go.
Okay, sorry, I was on mute. I agree with Richard 100% in terms of we are missing a great opportunity here instead of patching the boat to do something more radical and to fix once and forever, or at least once and for good time, our problems. Many companies are taking these issues about receiving penalties, sanctions, and do not.
We are not getting your voice, it
Yeah,
seems.
Luis, we lost you there. Sorry. All right. Well, let's see if we can. So, Raj, now that you're on,
Yeah.
Can you
Luis,
hear me?
are you there? There
Yeah,
you go.
now we can hear. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Something happened here.
It's okay.
No, I was saying that I agree with Richard 100% that we are missing the great opportunity that we have to fix these issues and by doing patches. And I strongly believe that we need to take more radical solutions. However, the big issue here is the budget. Normally, areas like compliance, they are taking us a cost centers instead of potential reduce of cost, like preventing for sanction, preventing from penalties. So they are to taking those costs as the cost of doing business, unfortunately. And it's not the way how it should be taken. We should have better budget in order to have better programs. I have implemented very good program in my institution. It's a matter of fact, we have not received a single MRA in the last 5 years. So
well, now you just jinxed it. Way to go, Luis. Now there's going to be one waiting for you at the end of this panel discussion.
No, but honestly, it's a good program. Normally, I focus on building teams, so I don't need to be there right now. I monitor everything here, but I don't need to be there. So I think that's what a leader should be doing: building teams, rely on the team. Otherwise, I always say, why you want to hire smart people to tell them what to do?
Right. That's a great point. So Raj, where where do you see the same question, right? Where do you see the biggest requirement from, securing that remote customer, like what, especially again, if you're starting from scratch or otherwise?
Okay, so definitely means if some organization is already running and you cannot start everything from a scratch, but most of the organizations, they will have to think in terms of, uh, target operating model, and data governance and management. Okay, and while, you know, thinking on operating model, they normally ignore. So while you are working on the operating model or you are making the decisions on the operating model, most of the organizations, they do two mistakes. Okay, one is like that target operating model. When they are working on target operating model, they don't keep any information or data architect as a consultant to that particular group while doing the data, the operating model. And that is the problem, because most of the financial institutions, not only financial institution, every institution needs to be data driven. So that
Right.
input is very important during that period. Number two is basically, that is more around being proactive, being proactive. So the thing is like, okay, a regulation comes. Say one example, BCBS 239, okay, that came into existence. Why only the credit risk people have to learn from that?
Right.
Why not KYC? Why not client onboarding? Why not? Because they are just trying to push, because you were not proactive, you were not doing the required things. So they are trying to push the best practices from data management and governance perspective. That was
Right.
basically BCBS 239. So why not? So the problem is like, okay, the most of the businesses, they don't, or particularly financial services also, they don't look from that perspective. They are not proactive. They don't try to understand the sentiments of the regulators on one side. And of course, as I have told during my talk, like most of the financial services are more obsessed with the regulations than the customer. So customer always had been coming here.
Yeah. And it's interesting, you know, you've got you've got national regulations, international
Yeah,
regulations, and then you've got local state, iterations, right? So,
that's right. Yeah,
here in the US, you've got your wonderful little mandates, right? And then each
yeah,
state wants to make it slightly different, right? So one state, you have to have, and a lot of them are doing this now, upfront consent on biometrics uses. You have to, prompt. You have to store the information.
yeah,
You've got all of the other, mandates and managing that, right? But it should become the responsibility of all to really stay focused on being able to pivot, because now it's not just about digital, it's about those regulatory pieces that you're going to have to apply.
yeah.
So, may or may not have had a recent incident, as in tomorrow, where we're trying to resolve, with a vendor who
That's
said we have to do something, right? So there's a lot of little pivots there, and to your point, when you're creating the operational plans, right? Number one, you have to have compliance and those features too. But even when you're talking about from a development process, or integrating or creating the the identity management, you have to have security there at all times, right?
all the
You
levels.
can't have security and compliance as a post effect, right? Because again, may or may not have experience, with, hey, we've got the project going, we thought we had security approval, and all of a sudden you're, within weeks of releasing, and they get the plug pulled because you didn't run it through security. They don't agree with the architecture. They don't agree with, the encryption. They don't agree with, the things, because it doesn't meet compliance or other, right? So there's definitely a lot of things that need to be done top down versus, the current, waterfall type of mentality, even if you're agile, right? I think, the most important thing for me is, just, the realization across all the industries, right? Some industries are impacted more, others are not, but, to be able to take that idea of a federated identity and leverage the fortunate and unfortunate events of the last, several months, to be able to say, go to the board, go to the C-suite, and go to the teams to be able to pivot, right? To be, as I like to call it, minimum viable effort, versus a product, right? How do you balance that out from the team's efforts to, what you need to deliver value on, and being able to push that digital identity out there is key at a centralized platform for each of the different companies and globally. So thank you, Rich. Thank you, everyone else, for the opportunity to be able to kind of go through these questions, and looking forward to some more great things.
Brilliant. Mel, thank you very much. Louis, thank you very much. Rajan as well, and Richard too. Thank you very much for being here. Lots of nodding heads at the end of the discussion, which is what we like to see.